just me. I get to talk about the fun things that I like to talk about, which is always one of my very favorite things, because I get to nerd out. That's what I really love to do, is nerd out a little bit on the amazing body, all that it has to give, all that it has to offer. Maybe offer a little bit of perspective about it as well, and hopefully be a guide. Be a guide that allows you to maybe be open to something that you didn't know, or maybe realize that that there's more that you have the ability to do with maybe what you're dealing with. And what I mean is, you know, sometimes we think often, and I say this because I hear it a lot, right? I hear a lot that the first thing that I do is I go to my doctor. And sometimes that makes a lot of sense. But I also have heard a lot, especially lately, interestingly, so many people have come to me who are just like ping pong balls in the medical system. And this isn't a bash on the medical system, right? It really is just really having the realization that that conventional medicine is really, really great at acute care. But I do believe that it often fails at chronic care. And that's what so many are dealing with, are these chronic situations. We can have acute situations come up within these chronic situations, right? But how do we manage the chronic pain, the chronic fatigue, the chronic disease, the chronic autoimmune condition, the chronic GI pain, right? How do we manage this stuff? And instead of putting, you know, BS labels on it like IBS, you know, let's understand what the cause is. Because dysfunction, there's always a reason. There's always a reason for dysfunction. There's always a reason for symptoms. And it's taking a step back and listening to your body and having the thought process that, what is it that my body's trying to tell me? Because it is. It's trying to tell us something, right? We got to learn to listen. And so, you know, as always, we always start the show with gratitude. And I think that that's, you know, as I'm kind of talking through all of this stuff, probably what I'm most grateful for today is the fact that, I was going to say that I chose this profession that I'm in. It chose me. You know, God put me here. It really wasn't me. I didn't know that this is what I was going to do. And so, you know, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I love to learn. I'm grateful that I love to listen, whether it's listening, you know, at conferences so I can be open-minded and learn and, you know, get the cutting edge information, whether it's listening to my clients who are sad and scared and frustrated and fearful and anxious and all of these things because they don't know what's going on with their bodies and they don't know why they're being failed in other areas. Anyway, it's an amazing place to be, and I think being on this wave of the functional medicine, functional nutrition world, where it truly is about digging into root cause and then finding solutions to the root cause instead of covering up symptoms, and at the same time being on this edge of epigenetics, where we're starting to be able to truly individualize care, truly individualize nutrition for a specific body and for specific needs based on epigenetic variants, which is fascinating and beautiful. And it's like this whole futuristic thing that's here now. And I for one am just stoked about the whole thing. We have so much to learn, but it's a really great place to be. So I'm excited to continue to learn, and I'm excited to continue to share. So I wanted to chat today about fertility and the immune system. And we talk about the immune system a lot. It obviously, it's a big part of our protector, right? It is our defender. It takes care of us. And that's one of the things that I hope that you remember about the body, period, is when our body is in a situation of struggle, right? When it's whatever challenge or struggle or whatever it is that you're dealing with, the body, all it wants to do is protect us and keep us alive. So, I'm trying to be more open-minded about the fact, and we still don't fully understand the immune system, and we certainly don't fully understand autoimmune disease. And so we talk about, when it comes to autoimmune disease, we talk about immune system dysfunction. And is that entirely correct? Maybe. But what if our body is actually just protecting us? What if it's not truly dysfunction, it's the body trying to protect us, but it's also speaking to us because something is not right. We're not giving it what it needs. We're not feeding ourselves properly. We're too stressed. We're not exercising enough. Hey, Brandon, my brother just joined. We're not exercising enough, or we're exercising too much, right? We have a lot of these athletes who are, these type A, hardcore, go-getter athletes, and they train so hard that the body starts to reject that intense training. We're not built that way. Hi, Sharon. And so we're built for more moderate exercise, right? So that's going to be dependent upon the person, what the person needs, right? Depending on health status, depending on, how the body reacts to certain type of exercise, as well as what makes you happy, right? So exercise is so important. Whatever it is, just do it. Go for a walk, go for a run, go for a swim, do yoga, do Pilates. I don't know, and I don't care. Just do something. And that's a key part. I'm a little off topic here, but it's a big part of it, because all of these things are what impact the immune system. And so when we talk about the immune system and its dysfunction, maybe it's not necessarily dysfunctional. Maybe it's just telling you, I need help here, and let's figure out what's going on. So, moving into so much of our immune system, like 70% of our immune system, is in the gut. So understanding that the microbes in our gut play a huge role in protecting us. And when those microbes are out of balance, right? So we have what we call commensal bacteria, and then what we call opportunistic bacteria and fungi. So an example of this is normal natural bacteria and fungus that live in the body, Candida being one of those. For women, if you've ever had a yeast infection, men can have this too. We can also have systemic yeast infections. Candida is normal and natural to the body, but when our microbiome, our commensal bacteria, are not robust enough, then it allows for the opportunistic bacteria to then become pathogenic. So that's problematic. But then we also have truly pathogenic bacteria, worms, microbes. I'm seeing a lot of amoebas lately, which is really interesting and not good. But it's the understanding that we all have these, and we have the potential for these. We no longer eat the foods that we should eat that allow for essentially, antimicrobial diets. So we always have to, when we're looking at immune system dysfunction, immune system yelling at us, whatever it is, we always want to look at the gut. But there's so much more to it, right? What are the other insults in our environment, in our world, that are potentially creating an issue for our immune system? So it can be toxins in the environment, right? It can be the glyphosate, the pesticides, the herbicides. And glyphosate is the one that's hit on the most today. But there are so many types of pesticides and herbicides beyond glyphosate that we need to understand that they're all problematic. They're all toxic. They're all xenoestrogens, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. But all of these things are creating a massive toxic burden in our body. It's in our food. It's in our water, it's in our air, it's in our cleaning products, it's in our body care products, it's in all of these things. And in order to calm the immune system down, we've got to start eliminating all of these things that we have control over, right? So we have control over what we put in our body. We have control over what we put on our body. We have control over what we clean our homes with. So we may not have control over the chemicals that are in the air due to the manufacturing plants and that kind of thing, and that's fine, but that's when we support our immune system to allow for the body to better eliminate the toxins that tend to build up in the body, right? So anyway, moving on, to the whole point of this talk is really about digging into how the immune system, how autoimmune conditions affect conception, fertility, pregnancy, having healthy pregnancy outcomes, right? Or having miscarriages and things like that, which are, the more I dig into this, I find it so disheartening that doctors, maybe it's not just doctors, but in the conventional medical world, women are being told that they have to deal with so many miscarriages before they can do something about it. And I've heard this several times. I'm like, how does that make any sense? I'm not sure how that makes any sense at all. So where I come at this is the preconception planning piece of it. If you are not suffering with any symptoms, then at the very least taking the time to plan for pregnancy. It literally is not something where you should just be super willy-nilly about it. And if you've listened to me at all, I've said it once, I've said it a million times. The health of your body today, both men and women, have the ability to impact 7 generations ahead. That's hundreds of years of health or dishealth. It's the most amazing, most empowering thing that I can even imagine is the control that I have, the control that all of us have over creating a healthy future. It's really beautiful. But just coming at it willy-nilly and not worrying about the outcomes, because we hear that the body will take care of itself and the baby will just take what the baby needs, and mom will just deal with it, kind of stuff. I think it's an antiquated way of looking at health, at fertility, at raising a family, and raising a healthy future. So I do think it's problematic. But the reason I got into preconception planning in the first place was because I kept having women coming to me who were dealing with all of the things that I deal with: GI dysfunction, autoimmune conditions, excessive weight, hormonal dysfunction, right? All of these things. And they're like, well, I'd like to get pregnant, but I've got all of this stuff going on. Or they're already struggling to get pregnant because it's not happening. And so I really wanted to, I'm doing all of the same things, but to really bring an awareness around the importance of preconception planning. And I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to say it a million times because to me, it's getting it out into the world that preconception planning is key. It is key for today, for the future, and for hundreds of years to come, right? So one of the things that I talk about a lot, and I want to hit on this a little bit because I do think it's really important, but then I'm going to move on to what I think is super intriguing as well. But I talk a lot about the thyroid gland, because the thyroid gland really, it impacts every part of us. There are thyroid hormone receptor sites on every cell of the body. It impacts everything about us. And if we are struggling with thyroid conditions, whether it's hypothyroid, hyperthyroid, Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune thyroid condition, if we're struggling with any of these, all of them will impact fertility. All of them will impact conception, and they'll certainly impact pregnancy, and unfortunately usually negatively. So we can have a situation where we don't even know we have symptoms, or we don't have symptoms, but we still have a thyroid situation. You know, the functional range of TSH, which is sort of the most commonly tested thyroid hormone, which is actually not truly a thyroid hormone, it's a pituitary hormone. So the pituitary gland secretes TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, to stimulate the thyroid, right? So then the thyroid produces T3 and T4. And so we may not have symptoms, or it may not, like I said, it may not even be a primary thyroid symptom. It can potentially be a it can not necessarily be a thyroid problem, but a secondary thyroid problem, secondary to the pituitary gland. And then going back to it, if we're having, liver dysfunction, gut dysfunction, all of that impacts the thyroid as well. So when we're told we're doing a thyroid test and all we're testing is TSH, T3, and T4, and maybe another one, and usually not, we're not getting the whole picture. And we have to have a true understanding of the entire picture to know where and what we address first. Remember, it goes back to root cause, right? We want to understand the root cause of dysfunction. Most cases, the pituitary or the thyroid or the cardiovascular system, you name it, it doesn't become dysfunctional just because, right? It becomes dysfunctional because there is an insult or there's deficiency, or both, right? And so we have to know that. And so I wanted to give just, I don't know if it really matters. I think so many people really already know these, but when it comes to symptoms, just in case, I think it's important to start naming off some symptoms, because if this is you start to think, I wonder if maybe I should get my thyroid tested, and insist on an entire thyroid panel, which is about 9 markers. We're usually testing 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? So it's about 9 markers, depending on the situation, maybe 10. Hypothyroid symptoms, goiter, right? So your thyroid sits right here. Goiter, neck, jaw pain, temperature changes. Interestingly, your temperature can change. It can go too low, and they can go too high. So it's kind of feverish. What's interesting too is if you're suffering with Hashimoto's, autoimmune thyroid, what can happen is it's everything, the immune system, and I want to reiterate this, Hashimoto's is not a thyroid condition. Hashimoto's is an immune system condition. So when we give people drugs for their thyroid, we're not addressing the root cause. And that's still not even the root cause. What's creating the immune system dysfunction in the first place, right? So we want to, I sort of lost my place. What can happen, because it's happened to my mom, is it can be, you can go into what's called a thyroid or a Hashimoto's storm, right? And so you're going into these massive hot flashes, and a lot of women think that it's actually their perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms, and which is what my mom thought. And it's these really intense swings in temperature when you're so completely out of whack. So this is a really big symptom. And what's interesting, because it's hard for me to comprehend, I wasn't there when this happened to my mom, but it was so intense for her that she almost had to take herself to the emergency department. It's super intriguing, but know that these things aren't normal. So if you have these swings in temperature, know that this is a symptom. Obviously, weight gain, right? Weight gain is very typical. Thinning and coarse hair, puppy face. They might sometimes call it moon face. You can also you'll see this kind of thing with cortisone steroids, like prednisone. Kind of creates this moon face. Low energy, obviously problems getting pregnant, recurrent miscarriages, and interestingly too is hypothyroid, because it makes everything slow down, right? It's just everything slows down, so the cardiovascular system slows down, so the arteries become kind of stiff. So it really can start to lead to cardiovascular issues, cardiovascular disease. So we want to be super aware and understanding if we do have these symptoms to start to dig. And we can be hypothyroid without being Hashimoto's, right? Which is the better option than having a full-on autoimmune condition. But knowing because when you know, then you know how to address it. And we can address it. Sometimes we might want to add on some drugs for a short period of time, especially in acute situations. But these are all things that can be addressed by lifestyle, by food, by supplementation, therapeutic supplementation, understanding what is creating the problem so we can start to then create balance. We also then, of course, have hyperthyroid. Usually hyperthyroid is autoimmune. And so nervousness, anxiety, palpitation, shortness of breath, heat intolerance, fatigue, dry, gritty eyes. So you can think about the eyes, get puffy. That's a hyperthyroid situation. Constant hunger, diarrhea, sweating, leg swelling, hair loss, itchy skin, muscle weakness, irregular cycle, premature menopause, inability to conceive, and chronic miscarriage. So you can see how hypo and hyper both have a significant impact on fertility and on conception and pregnancy. What I missed and didn't really say on hypo is, of course, and this is what I hear a lot, is always cold, an intolerance to cold. Fingernails are, splitting and breaking and that kind of thing. So those are all pretty typical signs of underactive thyroid. And so what's interesting too is if we have antibodies, so what happens is in an autoimmune condition, we have antibodies that develop by the immune system against thyroid hormones. And so the antibodies start to attack and damage the thyroid. But what happens also, which is so important to fertility and conception, is that once this happens, they can also then the body can also then to start to create these antibodies against estrogen, against FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, or LH, progesterone, human chorionic gonadotropin. So these are all really important hormones important to fertility. If we start having antibodies against these, they're certainly going to impact our ability to conceive. Then, beyond that, we can start having antibodies against neurotransmitters. Now, when we hear about neurotransmitters, we usually think about, serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, and what they can impact though, or some of these neurotransmitters. Back up. Neurotransmitters, interestingly, a lot of us have the sense, I was the same way, that neurotransmitters are produced in the brain because they affect how we feel and how we think and our focus and our mood and all of these things. So many of them are produced in the gut. 90% of serotonin, which is our happy neurotransmitter, is produced in the gut. So healthy gut, healthy bacteria is going to will help to initiate healthy neurotransmitter production. So if we have an unhealthy gut, unhealthy neurotransmitter production. What can happen though, again, once we start to have autoimmune dysfunction, I'm going to just continue to call it dysfunction because it's easy, and that's what everybody calls it at this point, but we start to have then antibodies against these neurotransmitters, which also can play a role in fertility. And so they are important to both uterine and ovarian function. And so when this happens, we can then start to see things like fibromyalgia, depression, night sweats, PMS. Who doesn't have PMS? You ladies out there. The interesting thing too is I think, little changes in the body are normal during PMS. Hormones are going to change, is going to create change. I've had so many clients who are monthly in so much pain that they regularly are going to the emergency department because they don't know how to handle the pain. This is not normal and it's not okay. And so I I had a client specifically, this was happening to her on a regular basis, and her doctor put her on 2 different birth control pills. This not only didn't help her, but she started having suicidal thoughts. Now, this was not her. Thankfully, she recognized that. But we have to really, really consider the drugs that we take and how everybody, no matter who you are, will react to them differently. And how, I think it's the number 2 or the number 3 top cause of death is medical error. So instead of just going to the drugs, and again, I will repeat, sometimes they're necessary, and I totally get that, but take a step back and listen to your body. Why is it in so much pain? This is why we have to continue to peel away the onion. Get to the root cause. Understand why there's such intense pain, because there's a reason for it. Okay, so if anybody's are attacking neurotransmitters, it also can create anxiety, hormone imbalance, right? Poor uterine lining, which is certainly going to affect fertility, and the inability for ovaries to respond to fertility drugs. So if you're going through fertility treatments, if you've not been tested for all of these autoimmune potentials, if that makes any sense, then you're not getting to the root cause. You're not addressing the dysfunction. You're not addressing the immune system that's screaming out, hey, I need you to jump on board here and help me out. So let's see. So then the uterus begins suffering because it won't produce adequate lining for implantation. And so what's important is really understanding if you're not conceiving, or if you are conceiving and not maintaining, okay? So there's very different approach to working with the body on both of those scenarios. So really finding somebody, working with somebody who's going to help you to understand the entire story, at least as much as possible, right? We don't know everything. We don't know a lot, but we also know a lot. So going back to one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to bring about soulful conception and preconception planning is because when these women are coming to me and having these significant health issues and they want to expand their families, my job is to dig. My job is to not cover up symptoms. My job also is to work with their provider, their other providers. I always want people to build their team, so if we need to have a doctor on board, yes, that's great. But I am here to dig and to help understand and to balance the body. That's my ultimate job, right? And so let's see. So if we're looking at all of these, sorry, I'm just kind of reading my notes here, but if we're looking at all of these situations, we want to continue our preconception planning, but if we're dealing with autoimmune conditions on top of that, then we want to continue that care throughout pregnancy as well. So we can do our best to decrease the chances of miscarriage. Okay, so it's a minimum of 10 weeks into pregnancy. I would say probably more than that. So interesting is if your doctor is testing your T3 and your T4 and your TSH and there's some dysfunction found, and one of the things I was going to say earlier, which is interesting to me, is as I have been practicing, the functional ranges for thyroid hormones and pituitary hormones have changed. They've shifted, right? When I first started practicing, TSH at 1.8 to 3 was optimal. Now we're looking at closer to 0.8 to 2.5. So note that if you go to your doctor and your thyroid is, your TSH is sitting at 3, and they're telling you it's fine, but you're still having symptoms of fatigue, you're still having symptoms of thinning hair, you're still having symptoms. Not everybody's going to have symptoms at 3. But if you're having symptoms, your practitioners need to listen to you. Advocate for yourself. They have to listen to you. This is another lesson that I learned with my mom. I think she was sitting at 4, which, her doctor kept telling you, this isn't a thyroid issue, you're not having a problem. Well, it ended up being Hashimoto's, but she would flare and it would jump up and then it would come back down. And she wasn't being listened to, and she also wouldn't advocate for herself. I had to keep pushing her and pushing her and pushing her, till finally they diagnosed her. They did all of the testing, they did a full thyroid panel like we asked for, and she was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. So it's unfortunate that sometimes we have to do the digging and tell our practitioners what we need. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes they don't listen. So find somebody who will listen, right? I get so frustrated with my clients coming to me and saying, my doctor just wants to put me on antidepressants, or my doctor's telling me it's all in my head, or my doctor is just telling me this is just the way you're made, you have to deal with it, that's life. Bullshit. Okay? So find your practitioners who are going to listen to you. Okay, moving off of my soapbox and on to let's see. I'm going to go through these. I think it's important for anybody who's listening, and maybe you are struggling, maybe you do have some thyroid dysfunction, autoimmune or not. There are a list of labs that are important to understanding your immune system, and if there's any kind of antibody activity which might be impacting fertility, conception, and pregnancy. Okay, so I think that these are important. So I think probably most everybody's heard of an ANA. It's an anti-nuclear antibody. So it's very general, just shows antibody activity, but it doesn't really show us where. So it is important, and just because it comes up negative doesn't mean we don't have antibody activity somewhere else. So it's a fine marker, but it's often we see that only, and it's not the end all be all by far. So we have activated partial thromboplastin time, lupus anticoagulant antibody, anti-thyroid antibodies. I do that if I am doing a thyroid panel on someone, they're always getting an antibody test, a thyroid antibody test, always, and there are 2 of them. Okay, serum immunoglobulins, leukocyte and antibody detection assay, antiphospholipid antibodies, anti-DNA histone antibodies, natural killer cell assay, and one that I run fairly regularly, which is not diagnostic, but it's a great test. It's called multiple autoimmune reactivity screen. This is a panel that we can run early, like it's predictive, for lack of a better word, of immune conditions 10 years down the road, right? Which is awesome to be able to mitigate autoimmune conditions or any kind of condition. We want to mitigate this stuff. We want to know how to mitigate it. So if I'm working with somebody who's dealing with fertility issues, or who's just dealing with autoimmune, or is just struggling, right? Often, depending on the situation, but often I'm going to run this multiple autoimmune reactivity screen, because it will show us antibody activity all over the body, and it will show it prior to the ability for some of these other tests to diagnose. So like I said, this is not a diagnostic test, it's an information test. But if we see where there's antibody activity, then we know how to address it, and we can catch it prior to. So if you're having, if you're having antibody activity toward any of these hormones early on, we can start to hopefully, squash that inflammation, squash that antibody activity. And what's so important is understanding that all of these things are lifestyle, right? We blame these things on genetics, but it's not, which brings me into also, I want to dig into endometriosis, which is funny because I only have 20 minutes and that's what I was going to spend most of my time on. But that's okay, because endometriosis is believed to be immune dysfunction. When I was in school, we were told it was autoimmune disease. And so that's how I address endometriosis, is as an autoimmune condition. Not everybody's going to agree with that, and that's okay. But I think that when we're looking at any kind of problem where the body is not doing its job properly for whatever reason, is it protective, is it dysfunction, whatever, there's still more to it. What's the reason? And that gets me, as I was going into the hereditary thing, there are a lot of those who believe that endometriosis is hereditary, which is a genetic component. I don't disagree, but in my mind, it really is more of an epigenetic situation, right? So we can have the potential. My sweet mom, I don't know why I keep bringing her up, but she had Hashimoto's, she had endometriosis. Before she passed, we saw that she just found out, nobody told her, but her lab showed us she also had rheumatoid arthritis. That's what happens, unfortunately, when we have one, we have multiple, and we can have the potential for autoimmune disease in our epigenome. We can have the potential for cardiovascular disease in our epigenome because it is passed on from generations. This is why I am so excited and motivated to get the word out about preconception planning, because if we can turn off these genes now, the likelihood of that potential expressing in our children, in our great-grandchildren, and our great-great-great-grandchildren is minimized, right? And so we can do this all just by our lifestyle. And so I will throw out there, and this is a one-person study, sweet mom having all of these autoimmune conditions that she struggled with. I have none. And I certainly anticipate not having any. Now, I'm not perfect. My environment's not perfect. It's pretty close. but it's an awareness, and so I can address my body, address my needs based on knowing my history, based on having the information on how to take care of myself through my own study and through my own research, which is also why I do what I do, so I can guide others so they can know their body. That's the best part of what I do, is when people have these amazing aha moments about their health, about their body, about what they need, and about how to move past whatever it is that they're dealing with. And, I tell people this all the time, that we're working on this stuff today, but this is stuff that you take with you for a lifetime. This is stuff that you take with you for the rest of your life, to help you know how to deal with, mitigate, avoid these struggles in life. And then again, also how we can mitigate all of this junk for the health of our kiddos, right? And so it's interesting when it comes to endometriosis. I'm going to start kind of running through this a little bit, but what we found is, for whatever reason, the blood in the uterine tissue tends to kind of be sprayed back. It's not all eliminated for whatever reason. What is that? And what is it, though, too, that that it's believed that this happens to every woman, right? It's not, perfection is, things aren't perfect, so, blood's going to sit in other places. Blood, typically, if it's in, it happens during surgery, it happens anytime there's blood in tissues, starts to create scar tissue, right? It's adhesions. And so why does endometriosis happen for some but not all? Don't know, right? That's what the question is. And so is there a situation of toxicity, of maybe weakened or dampened immune function? What is it that's creating this? And yes, there is a component of hereditary or epigenetics that's involved. But if we focus on keeping the immune system strong, keeping our gut microbiome strong, these are the best tools that we have to avoid these situations from popping up, okay? And so, interesting too is, you know, we can find endometrial tissue from endometriosis on, you know, throughout the pelvic cavity. It can happen anywhere. It also can start to bind things, right? That scar tissue, those adhesions bind everything together, so it creates tons of pain. And the prostaglandins are crampy, right? So it produces lots of prostaglandins, which create cramps, which intensifies cramps. So it really is kind of a nasty situation. What I keep trying to say, though, interestingly, is there have been these lesions also found in brain tissue, on liver tissue. We don't know how it migrates like that, but it's fascinating, and it's a little bit scary that it can migrate to these other tissues that are outside of the pelvic cavity. And so, as we know, you know, this can severely impact conception, fertility. It can be really, really problematic. So, what I want to do, I think, is get into how do we address these things, and what is it that makes the most sense whether we're trying to avoid because we know our history, whether we're trying to dampen systems. Can we get rid of symptoms? Maybe. We don't really know. You know, endometriosis, they say, is not curable, but we have stopped the spread, we've stopped the progression. Sometimes surgery is necessary, but what's interesting too, I think the benefit of surgery is if you're trying to get pregnant and you can eliminate these lesions, it can create a situation where you can get pregnant quickly because you're not dealing with all of the lesions and, you know, all of the junk and the pain and, you know, the adhesions and that kind of thing. But probably what's going to happen if you don't address it at its core is the lesions will come back. So you get pregnant. Also, which is kind of cool, because you're not having a period during pregnancy, the spread, the problems that endometriosis creates are much lessened during pregnancy, which is awesome, right? But it doesn't mean that it's gone, and it doesn't mean that it's cured. So we want to be really, really aware of that. But I mean, I think that's the ideal situation. If you have endometriosis, you know, a stage 3 or a stage 4, especially where you have surgery, you clear things out as much as you can. You get pregnant, and then you have to change your lifestyle in order to start to create balance and allow the body to work properly and hopefully mitigate more of these lesions forming. And so I'm going to talk to you as I would talk about any autoimmune condition, whether you agree that endometriosis is autoimmune or not. Doesn't really matter because it's an inflammatory condition no matter what. And the things that are going to increase inflammation, gluten and dairy, surprise, right? And so if you are struggling with an autoimmune condition, it's very black and white. Most things are not black and white. Very, very black and white with autoimmune disease. Gluten and dairy are inflammatory no matter what. They're problematic. They have to be 100% out of the diet. It's just the way that it is. It sucks, sure, but it's just kind of the way that it goes in order to avoid flares, avoid lesions, avoid continued problems throughout life. It's just part of it. The cool thing is, the world is dealing with so many of these chronic conditions that we are starting to move away from gluten and dairy anyway, and maybe not move away from, but we are coming up with some really amazing options, especially for gluten. You know, we've got great pastas, we've got great bread that are all, not made of simple, unhealthy grains. You know, I'm still not convinced that grains are our friend. And I think for a lot of people, they're not our friend at all. And I do think that that's individual. But gluten specifically is inflammatory, especially here in the United States. But it's inflammatory, it's problematic. You just got to get it out. It's not healthy. It's not doing us any favors. Let's see. Oh, interesting. So the hormone that really can push endometriosis and push problems with endometriosis you can probably assume is estrogen. And so this was an interesting stat that I didn't know. 60 to 80% of the estrogens in the typical Western diet come from milk and other dairy products. This is linked to a higher rate of testicular and prostate cancers. We eat so much processed cheese and processed milk. Yes, it tastes good, but hear me out. This is beyond autoimmune disease. This is just pure health, okay? If you are a dairy person, if you have the need, feel the need to eat dairy and you don't have an autoimmune condition, you got to get away from the conventional milk. It is a dead food. It is full of hormones, pesticides, herbicides, unhealthy fat because the animal was unhealthy, right? The animal typically is obese. It is higher in unhealthy saturated fat. There's healthy saturated fat and unhealthy saturated fat. When an animal is unhealthy, the saturated fat is going to be unhealthy, right? It's pretty simple. If the animal is healthy, grass-fed, 100%, then the saturated fat is going to be healthy. Now, we can have certain epigenetic variants where we don't do well with saturated fat. I'm one of those people. It's not that I avoid it, I just limit it a little bit, right? Because I know that's potentially a problem for me. But that's not for everyone. But for everyone, an unhealthy animal creates an unhealthy person. And so these estrogens that are in our milk and in our dairy products are severely problematic, creating situations of, boys and men, getting breast tissue. It's not okay. So what do we want to look at? We want to look at lots of good vegetables, right? I mean, just, we want a variety of vegetables. I don't care if they're cooked. I don't care if they're raw. Just have them on your plate. Just eat your vegetables. We gotta have them, right? And so healthy fat. What's healthy fat? Coconut oil. Not a highly processed coconut oil. Just a good raw coconut oil. Avocado oil, olive oil. Don't cook with olive oil. These are good, healthy fats. Healthy meat and healthy fish. Some people will say you want lean meat. I am one. I will say a million times over, it's not about being lean. It's about it being a healthy animal. The fat's not the problem. It's the inflammatory fat from an inflamed animal that's a problem and creates inflammation for us. Okay? So 100% grass-fed, no grains, no corn, no soy. Soy is a phytoestrogen. So we feed this to our animals, to our dogs also, hugely problematic, but to cows, to pigs, to chickens. They're not soy eaters. They're not intended. It is not how God created them, right? And so we're giving them these grains and soy full of phytoestrogens that's then going to be in the meat, it's then going to be in the milk, and it's then going to translate to us. So then we're getting all of the inflammation as well as the excess estrogen. And so this is why we want to stay away from conventional animals, on top of the fact that they're treated poorly. It's disgusting. It just pisses me off. The way we treat our animals, these conventionally raised animals, is inhuman. It's inhumane, and so it really frustrates me. So if anything, eating healthy animals who are treated well, the way that God intended them to be treated. We are here to serve these animals because in the end they serve us. I think it's so important to keep that in mind. Other things important though is that alcohol has estrogenic activity on the body, specifically beer, wine, and bourbon, interestingly. So what happens, and this can be, with men a lot of the times, we see these beer bellies, right? Those fat cells, that deep adipose tissue, it's very, very active, and it produces hormones, produces estrogens. So we have in men this deep fat that produces estrogen. Then what's going to happen, which is so interesting to me, it's a natural process where we have what's called aromatase, which is an enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. So that's what's happening in this fat tissue when we have these men who are struggling with testosterone issues and their testosterone's low. And if they're not testing their estrogen, which is going to be high, but if it's not being tested, and we just give them testosterone implants, right, hormone replacement or testosterone replacement therapy, what's it going to do? Well, it's just going to turn into more estrogen if we don't address the root cause. So we've got to lose that belly fat. We've got to decrease stress. We've got to get out and get some exercise. This is the stuff that is more likely to increase testosterone and decrease estrogen in men. Let's see. What are all the other fun things? Oh, grains. Getting into grains. So there's a term called xenoestrogen. And xenoestrogens can be from a natural form, like a fungus, and it can also, but it also can be chemical. So there are, pesticides, herbicides are considered xenoestrogens. And what that means is they go into the body. We have estrogen receptor sites on every cell of the body, men and women, and xenoestrogens come in and they bind to these estrogen receptor sites. So our natural innate estrogen is not able to do its job because it's bound by xenoestrogens, whether it's from a chemical or whether it's from a fungus. And so there's a fungus that colonizes on corn and grains. So much of our food is made of corn and grains, especially our processed foods. And so when it's contaminated with this specific type of fungus, it creates estrogenic activity. So it goes back to not eating all of the processed foods that's estrogenic, yes, pesticides, herbicides, processed oils and fats that are completely inflammatory. These are really, really problematic. There are also certain preservatives that promote estrogenic activity. I've never heard of these, but 4-hexylresorcinol, which is on shrimp and shellfish, it keeps them fresh and keeps the color on them. I didn't know this until this morning. I love shrimp, and is this on my shrimp? Is this creating a problem for me? Potentially, because I just did my testing and I am not eliminating xenoestrogens properly. So huge problem for me. So that's an interesting one, and some will say this is why we don't eat shrimp and shellfish. I love shrimp and shellfish. It's really too bad. But, or know your source, right? Here in Colorado, I don't know any sources. So we also have propyl gallate, which is in vegetable oil, meat products, potato sticks, chicken soup-based chewing gum, which chewing gum also has gluten in it. Again, goes back to these processed foods that we're eating on a regular basis are contributing to our body being in this chronic, it could be low-grade inflammatory state. If you're struggling with a disease or with symptoms, it could be a high-grade, inflammatory state. All of these things are not doing us any favors. And just, eating from the earth, eating good, healthy, real food. And let's take a step back. Grains are from the earth. Doesn't mean that they're benefiting us. I think, if we think about, if we're eating sourdough bread, which is, probably one of the original ways of eating bread, right? It's fermented, so the gluten content is reduced significantly or gone, as well as their heirloom grains, and it's good, healthy yeast from the air and not from a laboratory. So what we've done is we've taken what's good and we've made it really, really bad. Okay, running low on time, but things like water. Here's what I learned this today. And so our water, if we have women on birth control pills, we can't take hormones out of our water. So we have women on birth control pills, we have hormone replacement therapy, we have hormones in our cattle, which are defecating hormones and into the rivers. So there is this interesting, what we're finding are in some of these fish is that they're producing eggs in their testes. So we have produced unintentionally, I hope, intersex fish because of all the hormones that are in our water. Fascinating and freaking scary. Jeez, man. So So I had to say that because our water, get a good filter. Don't drink out of plastic bottles. Plastic bottles, the plastic is estrogenic. It's also toxic and carcinogenic. Other things to keep in mind, BPA. BPA is on the print on receipts. I think every time I grab a receipt, the person who gives it to me thinks I'm crazy because I'll take it and I'll hold it like this and I'll fold it where I don't have to touch the ink. They're like, what are you doing? But it's truly, I don't want to touch the ink on it because it's a xenoestrogen and it's disruptive. Canned foods and drinks, keg liners. So that's a double whammy. If you're a beer drinker, don't get me wrong, I love beer. If you're a beer drinker and you're drinking out of a keg, it's full of more estrogenic effect, well, BPA, I'm not saying that right, but which has estrogenic effects. Water bottles, and then phthalates. So phthalates, estrogenic effects. Synthetic scents, stop using your plug-ins. Those are so damaging. The scents that you plug into the wall, or your candles, if they're not just essential oils, you gotta stop using them. They're so damaging. They're damaging to you, your kids, your dogs, and your cats. These things are so bad. I stayed at a friend's house one time and I just had to take it out of the wall and open the windows because it's too much. It's so toxic. Makeup, get good natural healthy makeup. Vinyl shower curtains, vinyl flooring, all of your vinyl products, laundry products. Think about what you're putting in your laundry. Think about the scents. If you smell your sheets and it's a conventional laundry detergent, it's problematic, right? If you smell your clothes, and we're smelling these all the time, all day long and all night when we sleep. We don't need to smell them, or just use essential oils. I use orange oil. You can get a big bottle of orange oil and stick it in your washer and stick it in your dryer, and you might get a little orange oil on your clothes, but it comes out. My husband hates that. So I'm trying to figure that one out. But anyway, you got to be really careful with that stuff. Nail polish, cling wrap, huge problem. And then we have, let's see, the BCPs. That's where we're having problems with fish creating eggs in their testes. And then essential oils. Essential oils are beautiful and they're great, but for the purposes of fertility, we want to be really careful with certain oils. So we want to be careful with jasmine, clary sage, geranium, lavender, tea tree oil. They're great for a lot of people, but we have to know what your situation is and why and what you're trying to do. And then that's why we have a lot of education around essential oils, because they are very strong. I mean, they're truly medicinal, so we want to pay attention to that. Incorporating GLA, which is gamma-linolenic acid, or primrose oil, or borage oil, really, really great for women in general, but for helping with pain, for helping with fertility, for helping with conception, all of those things. Really great stuff. Okay, I think I'm at a point to where I probably should stop because I'm a little over my time, but I hit most everything that I wanted to hit, I believe. I think the biggest thing to really take to heart is how much control we have.